Okay, we're getting pretty good number of responses already. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll just so we can keep moving. And we'll revisit the results here at the end. So I think everything will be answered in time with the presentation today. So with that, I just wanted to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Mica McMillan. She's from the Environmental Horticulture Department and the Fort Lauderdale Research and Education Center from UF. And she is the palm specialist for the state. And I know that something that's very relevant is palm nutrition and fertilizer. And so she's going to share all of the good details with us here today. And I'm going to go ahead and be the one that's managing the share screen. So just let me know, Mica. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and just tell me whenever you need me.
All right, can you hear me still, Henry? And yeah, okay, good. Thank you very much, John. I appreciate the invite to speak today. So today we're going to talk about maximizing your palm fertilizer application. And as John said, we're moving to the next one, John. I'll just say next.
John, can you do it in a presenting mode?
Hold on. I am share screen. Let me try it a different way. How's that coming through?
No, it's good. It works for me.
Okay.
We're good. Okay. So what are the three most common palm fertilizer questions that I receive almost on a daily basis? They would be regarding, number one, palm nutrition, and the most frequently asked questions are in regards to potassium and boron. Every year that changes though. Sometimes we have a lot more potassium questions. Sometimes we have a lot more boron, sometimes magnesium. It just depends on the year. Secondly, I get a lot of questions on disease and also lethal bronzing, and I am not the palm disease specialist, nor am I the lethal bronzing specialist. That would be Dr. Brom Dillon for the disease and Dr. Brian Bader for lethal bronzing. But when you send these questions, sometimes I get them and I just forward them on to Brom and Brian. But it's good to keep things moving. And Amanda just said, John, that presentation mode is not being displayed. So what we're going to review today is just talking about palm nutrition and how you can visually see that there's something wrong with a palm in terms of the nutrients, but also you'll be able to see, and you just hop back out again, John. So we're going to try it one more time. But what I want you guys to take away from this presentation today is for you to say, okay, when you go outside, you're going to look at your palm trees and say, oh, that's potassium deficiency, or oh, that's magnesium or boron. And you'll be able to pick up what is wrong with the palm so that we can, that should be working, John. No?
I think it's up, but I don't know if it's what everyone else is seeing.
I'm not seeing that in presentation mode. I'm seeing it in slide mode.
Oh, gotcha. I see what's going on here. 1 second.
So, like I said, the most common fertilizer deficiency, particularly in South Florida, is going to be potassium deficiency. So you move to the next slide, John. I'll just say next for us to keep moving. Now, potassium deficiency is very easy to see the differences. When you're looking at a palm tree, Potassium deficiency is normally found on the oldest fronds, which are at the bottom of the tree. And those fronds tend to be, when they're potassium deficient, see this yellow and orange speckling. So if you hold up a palm frond and you look at, towards the sun and you look underneath it, you're seeing this yellow and orange speckling like you see on this photo right here. Also, with potassium deficiency, you have the leaf tip necrosis, or particularly with the phoenix species, you're going to see curly tips. With the phoenix species as well, you're going to find that you can almost touch the tips and they break. They're very brittle. They're very potassium deficient. The leading cause of potassium deficiency in South Florida happens to be a high nitrogen fertilizer, which leads to the potassium deficiency. So to not go into the complications of soil chemistry, what we'll say is that a lot of homeowners and landscapers apply a high nitrogen fertilizer, and that high nitrogen fertilizer leads to potassium, not attaching to the cation exchange sites, and it leaches through the soil profile. Next, John. So this was a subdivision up in Davenport, Florida, which is basically south of Orlando. And what I'm seeing in brand new subdivisions is there's not a lot of organic matter. Typically, even here at the research station and throughout South Florida, we do not have a lot of organic matter in our soils. Tends to be less than 3%. So that's not a lot. And these new subdivisions, they're bringing in, fill or, pure sand, and there's no organic matter there. So these palms obviously are very potassium deficient. They're way past gone here. This is a severe case. But this look was found throughout the subdivision. Now, these are Phoenix robelinis. We know this was potassium deficiency, even though it's pretty far gone. But again, in high sand soils with low organic matter, we tend to see a lot of potassium deficiency. Next, John. On the older leaves, always remember with potassium deficiency, it's going to be on the older leaves, and then you're going to see the leaf tips are curling or they're necrotic. So on a fan palm, definitely you're going to see the same thing. The leaf necrosis is at the tips. And you can almost see on the figure on the left, or the picture on the left, you see where we have the yellow and orange speckling. So obviously very deficient palm. Next. So the next, probably this year, I've seen a little bit of manganese deficiency. Last year, manganese was pretty chronic throughout South Florida. But how you can tell manganese deficiency, think of manganese and the chemical symbol is Mn. So that N, think of manganese as on the new fronds. Where you're going to find deficiencies, manganese deficiency is on the newer fronds. And with the new fronds, that almost kind of looks like frizzy hair, or the frizzled, the fronds get very frizzly, kind of all over the place. And on this picture, you can clearly see that it's on the newer fronds. So right next to the spear leaf in the middle, and then frond 1 and frond 2 are very manganese deficient. So the way to remember manganese is Mn, new fronds. Always with manganese, you're going to find that the base of the frond, the base of the leaf, is typically very deficient and frizzled. If you're looking at this picture here, you can see that the tip of the frond looks green and healthy, but the base of the frond is very frizzled or dead or necrotic. So that is a clear indication of manganese deficiency. Also, with manganese, we get this longitudinal brown streaking. So if those fronds fall, or if you go in and prune those fronds off and you see like a brown streak, then you'll know that that's manganese deficiency. Why do we have manganese deficiency in our soils or in our palm trees? It's because we have very high pH soils. And when it's a high pH soil, we know that manganese is not available. Next. This is another picture with absolutely showing the necrotic streaking on the palm frond, long brown necrotic streaking. And then the picture on the right was a picture that I took, and we're seeing the newer fronds and at the base of the frond are very necrotic, clear indication of manganese deficiency. Next. The next one is magnesium. You are going to see magnesium deficiency on palm trees, most often on our Phoenix species. And that's airweed, Phoenix dactylifera, sylvestris, robellini. What I refer to magnesium is, it reminds me of mellow yellow. So if you're as old as I am, you know that mellow yellow is like that orange, or sorry, that yellowish drink, almost had like a green tinge to it. At least the can did, right? So it was like this greenish yellow vibe. So magnesium is going to be on the middle fronds to the oldest fronds. And what is so cool about magnesium deficiency is that the middle of the frond is this bright green, and the tips of the frond tend to be this yellowish or bright yellow color. It's like I said, it's one that you typically find on the lower frond. So you may also see a little bit of potassium deficiency with the magnesium deficiency. Again, on the Phoenix species, I'll be honest with you, I think I've maybe seen 2 or 3 other palms that had magnesium deficiency, but for the most part, it's on the Phoenix species. It also, the other thing I'll say too about magnesium is I don't typically see it this that often, unless it's at pretty severe soil sites. This is not one of the most popular nutrient deficiencies. The way to remember magnesium deficiency also is that it's MAG, so that the AG, think of it as age, so it's typically going to be on those middle to lower fronds. What leads to magnesium deficiency is when people see this, they go out or they throw out a high potassium fertilizer, and that high potassium fertilization leads to magnesium deficiency, because the potassium will kick off the magnesium, and then we find that the plant doesn't have any access to the magnesium. Magnesium will leach through our sand soils. So when you do see magnesium deficiency, it's something where you can treat it using a 8-2-12-4, very easily treatable, but it is one that is typically found with also potassium deficiency. Next slide. Boron deficiency, one of my favorite nutrient deficiencies, because I tend to get pictures from our homeowners or the landscapers, and they're like, what is this? And they're always the funkiest looking pictures. They just look so crazy to me, kind of like all the Dr. Seuss pictures. So for me, boron deficiency, I equate with Dr. Seuss, because the palm tends to look really kind of creepy or, weird. With boron, it's always on the new leaves. And if you have a boron deficiency, you're going to see some accordion leaves, but more often than not, you're going to see these unopened spear leaves. So sometimes when you look up at like a coconut palm, for instance, if you see 2 or 3 unopened spear leaves, that for sure is an indication that you have a boron deficiency. And then you're going to start seeing where your inflorescences start to become necrotic, and maybe even the palm starts to like bend a little bit. The palm head starts to turn, or sometimes it can be very severe, so it'll drastically start drooping to one side. So that for me is the clear indication of boron deficiency. The problem with boron is that for boron during the rainy season, it is more likely going to leach from our soils. But during the dry season, boron will attach to the organic matter in the upper layer of the sand profile or soil profile, and then the plant can't take it up because boron becomes so tightly bound to the organic matter. So it's a no-win situation with boron. Rainy season, it leaches, and in the dry season, it becomes basically immobilized in the soil and the plant can't take it up. So again, there's no win with this. And the other issue, if you want to go on, John, next slide. The other issue we have with boron is you can see in this picture is the 3 or 4 unopened spear leaves, and then the accordion right here on the left-hand side, that accordion look to the leaves. I see it all over in South Florida all the time, particularly along canals or the waterways. We tend to see a lot of boron deficiency. Now, one of the problems with boron is that if you even give it a little bit more than you should, you can potentially kill the landscape palms, meaning fertilizer. If you over fertilize with boron, you can kill the landscape palms, the turf grass, the landscape plants. So boron, it's very, very tricky. Our application rate for boron deficiency is 2 to 4 ounces of soluble or borax and 5 gallons of water. So it's a small amount and a large volume of water. And you typically will see boron correct in about 5 months. But again, it's very, I've had a lot of phone calls on this one. It's not a half a gallon. It's not a 1 gallon. It's 5 gallons of water that you're putting that soluble or the borax in to treat for boron deficiency. If you over apply, you can possibly kill surrounding plants as well as the palm tree itself. So next slide, please, John. Now, funny that I didn't start off talking about nitrogen deficiency. And the reason why is because landscape palms tend not to be nitrogen deficient. We have a lot of nitrogen in our soils, and I very rarely see nitrogen deficiency in landscape palms. Where I will see it though is in container palms. And again, that's a whole nother soil specific question, but why that's interesting for us is that the microbes are, busy in container palms. Also, we have nitrogen can leach out of these container palms, but in the landscape situation, not typically. How you would identify nitrogen deficiency would be like this bright yellow fronds. I mean, it's very bright. And we know that nitrogen deficiency is normally caused by there's not a lot in the soils. But, in most landscapes, we're fertilizing them. So there is obviously nitrogen in those fertilizers typically. Also, cool temperatures can lead to nitrogen deficiency. Nitrogen is, though, the only nutrient that we can correct pretty quickly in palms. 2 to 3 months, you will be able to fix that deficiency. However, with other nutrient deficiencies, that's not the case. Okay, next slide, John. Now, why the fertilization of palms is so difficult is we have a lot of people moving to Florida, homeowners, and I hear this quite frequently, particularly when I came on board, 3 years ago. Landscapers were like, people, we have to educate the homeowners, those who aren't familiar with palm trees, about how they're not going to see an immediate turnover when you fertilize the palms. So if your palm, for instance, is already very potassium deficient, a palm won't respond to fertilizer in a day or, a couple weeks. The palm for a potassium deficiency will basically have to replace the full head. Same thing with magnesium and manganese. Boron, it's a little bit faster. We can see some of the spear leaves open up. But with nitrogen is the other one. If we apply the nitrogen fertilizer, then we'll see a response. The palm will respond to the nitrogen fertilization. But for everything else, it could take months. And if it's very severe, it could take 2 to 3 years. So when I came on board, the first thing I did was I started applying treatments on some of the, number one, the palms at my house, the palms here at the research center, just so we could see, basically how long is this going to take in South Florida with all the rain and the leaching and the nutrients. And if it's very severe, we're finding, 2 to 3 years. So homeowners don't understand that. And for these common nutrient deficiencies, it won't correct like it will with turf grass. And there's a misconception, oh, palms are monocots, therefore they should respond like turf grass because turf grass is also a monocot. This is not the case. So our fertilization, when we apply for potassium, magnesium, manganese, and boron, is not at it's for the leaves that are developing or the leaves that are still in the apical meristem. Next slide, please. So how can we help, go back one, John. How can we help the green industry? We can help by talking to some of the homeowners and just making it very clear that, palms, it might take them 2 to 3 years to respond to the fertilizer or for them to replace that entire head so that it's looking green and healthy. We know that, if you have a frond at the bottom of the palm and it's starting to turn a little off color, IFAS has always recommended that you still keep that frond on there, even if it's, it's turning brown, but it's got some green left to it, because the palms will recycle that nutrient and basically send it back up to the apical meristem. And the palm can reuse those nutrients that are in the fronds. So we don't typically recommend taking off fronds that are still green. But if you're in the landscape industry and you are set to, or you're scheduled to go ahead and prune these palms, then go ahead and do it, prune them. But just keep in mind that, they might need a little extra fertilizer to overcome that loss of what was basically potassium and some of the other nutrients in those lower fronds. So our goal is to prevent the over application of fertilizers by, one, looking at what the nutrient deficiencies are, and we just went over those. And we also want to educate those who are new to Florida, who are not familiar with palms, that it can take a while for palms to respond to those fertilizers. So in order to set that in your head, I'll tell you the story of a gentleman who sent me a picture of his palms, and because I'm a soil scientist, I said, please send me the soil and we'll take a look. We got the soil sample and we looked at.
And then there's a button that makes it cloudy.
Oh, I can hear somebody. So what he did was he sent me the picture of the palm, and then he sent me his soil sample. And his soil sample was, I kid you not, was basically half fertilizer. And I said, oh my goodness, you're applying a lot of fertilizer here. And he said, yeah, because, the palm just never responded. So I said, well, how long have you been waiting, for that palm to respond? Oh, a couple months. Well, in this case, it was a very large Phoenix species, and it can take, again, like I said, 2 to 3 years. So I'm going to I've showed you what the deficiencies look like, and then I'm going to tell you about how we apply fertilizers to palms and a program method or a program approach so that we can prevent this over application of fertilizer. Next, John. So again, fertilizer won't correct this right away. So these leaves will remain on the palm until they die naturally or are pruned off. And that's something we just have to explain to those who don't understand, who are not in our industry. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about causes of palm nutrient deficiencies. Next slide. So the biggest issue we have is soil pH. Here in South Florida, and I'm speaking basically below I-4, we have a high pH. And what I mean by a high pH is we tend to be in these, 7.5, 8, 8.5. So when you look at this slide that I'm showing you, you're going to see a range of acidity and a range of alkalinity scale. And why is 7 pH so great? Because almost all of our nutrients are available at a pH of 7, which is considered neutral. But when you start getting up to a higher range of alkalinity, like an 8, 8.5, you're going to see that certain nutrients like manganese and iron. You can see how they start getting less available the higher the soil pH is. And that's why we have deficiencies like iron and manganese and sometimes boron. So soil pH is a big part. Next slide, John. Did I lose you, John? Oh, there we go. Okay, so the other issue we have here is that we have very sandy soils typically, and our soils leach. So another reason why we don't want to over apply fertilizers is because we do not want to leach a lot of that fertilizer into our waterways and into the ocean. So heavy irrigation, heavy rainfall leaches nitrogen, potassium, magnesium, and boron. That's why here in Florida, we always make the recommendation for a slow release or a controlled release fertilizer. Additionally, why sometimes we have these nutrient deficiencies is because of cool temperatures. So when basically Orlando or North gets hit with some colder temperatures, I'll get some phone calls from palm lovers saying, "Hey, something's happened," or my palm is not looking great. A few months after these cold temperatures hit, and it's like, well, because you have to remember that these reduced respiration rates cause reduced nutrient absorption. So the colder it is, the less likely the palm is to take up a lot of those nutrients. Manganese is a big one for that one. So if you start to see manganese deficiency, you got to think back a couple of months and think, oh, you know what? We went through that cold spell where there wasn't a lot of it was just cold and there was no nutrient absorption, so palm wasn't able to take up any of that manganese. That's when you start seeing the manganese deficiencies. A lot of our soil amendments, particularly compost, can tie up our nutrients. And of course, if you're applying an excessive amount of nitrogen, that will kick off the potassium and magnesium deficiencies because nitrogen will hog those cation exchange sites, and that will force nitrogen or potassium and magnesium to leach out. Next slide. So we are talking about an integrated approach to fertilizing landscapes. And we know that plants need nitrogen for sure. And then also we know that they need magnesium, manganese, and a teeny tiny bit of boron. So we wanted to come up with a fertilizer, or my predecessor did, where that would be applicable to all plants in the landscape. And we know that also palm roots exist with other tree roots, with other landscape plant roots, turf grass roots. So what's something that we could apply to everything in the landscape and everybody would be happy? Next slide, John. And that one would be, for instance, the nitrogen. Turf loves nitrogen and iron. Your broadleaf trees and shrubs, nitrogen, iron, magnesium, potassium, and manganese. And then the palms are big lovers. We didn't talk about nitrogen deficiency a lot because it's not prevalent here, but palms still do need nitrogen, iron, magnesium, potassium, manganese, and boron. So all the plants have the same type of deficiencies, and our recommendations, particularly for palms, addresses broadleaf trees and shrubs, palms, and turf as well. Next slide, John. So our preventative program is this. We want you to apply fertilizers. The one we recommend, which is the 8-2-12-4. We want you to apply these and starting out of our blackout bands. So that would be starting November 1st, all the way through the dry season until I believe it's June 1st in this county. So from November 1st to June 1st, you can apply this 8-2-12 because it has the nitrogen and the phosphorus in it. And we can make these recommendations of applying about 3 to 4 times a year, but within that dry season window. So that's why we make a recommendation for, not applying during the rainy season, but also having enough of these nutrients in a certain ratio, such as the nitrogen is in a 2, phosphorus, we don't need a lot of phosphorus, it's in a 1 ratio, and then potassium is in a higher ratio than the nitrogen, and then a little bit of the magnesium. So our recommendation is for a ratio of 2:1:3:1. And that's a regular application, 3 to 4 times a year. And what we normally propose is an application in November, an application in January, and in March. And then, if it's pretty severe, then another one in May. So that's 4 times. But if it's not as severe and you just want to keep on top of it 3 times within that 6-month time period or time frame. If you are going to apply these fertilizers yourself, we want you to follow the label rates. And of course, we're broadcasting. Thank you, Henry, for that. Henry has put down the fertilizer, ffl.ifas fertilizer website, which everyone should definitely check out. And then we want to broadcast it every 3 months, fertilize within 50 feet of any palm. And we make this recommendation that if you're going to fertilize a palm, and believe it or not, this is a question I get quite frequently. How do you fertilize a palm? Well, you take that granular fertilizer and you walk out half of a frond length. So if your fronds are about 8 feet long, walk out 4 feet and then distribute that palm fertilizer around the tree, giving it a nice even distribution. We do not recommend sticking the fertilizer in a hole around the tree. We recommend the soil, the top of the soil application. Why? Because we feel that, number one, you'll reach more roots if you're applying from the ground up, and also you have less chance of leaching those fertilizers if you're putting it too far deep below the palm roots. Remember, palm roots are typically within that 0 to 6 inch depth. So they intermingle with your turf roots. So think of it like this: 0 to 6 inch depth. You don't want to be putting spikes into the soil because more than likely it's just going to leach past most of these palm roots, and and you're going to be getting very little of your turf grass roots as well. Sulfur coated products are always good because they help to lower the pH on our alkaline soils. It makes it a little bit better to uptake the nutrients. Next slide, John. So our granular fertilizer recommendation is 1.5 pounds of an 8 to 12 4 per 100 square feet. And this makes a very good question always, is 1.5 pounds of 8 to 12 4 per 100 square feet. And another frequent question is, how do you apply 1.5 pounds per 100 square feet? What does that mean? Most people don't understand what that rate means. And I always say you take a soup can cup that's about like a Campbell's soup can. And what is 100 square feet? Well, 100 square feet is 10 by 10. So we recommend that if you have a palm, and you basically, walk out like I said, halfway to the fronds, and you're distributing that within that 10 by 10 area around the palms. You want to apply, again, like I said, every 3 to 4 months out of the year. And for us, for most counties, not all, but for most counties, we do not recommend applying nitrogen and phosphorus between June and September 30th. So, because those are our fertilizer bans. But again, Henry suggested checking out the fertilizer ordinance rules that he just sent via the PowerPoint presentation. Next slide, John. So this is something we do not want to do, and I see it all the time. Do not apply fertilizers like this. You want to evenly distribute it, give it a much wider girth, but you're going to have a tendency to burn around the trunk of that palm with some of these fertilizer applications, and this is going to absolutely lead to burning of the roots. That's just too much fertilizer. A nice even distribution of the fertilizer throughout that profile would be much better. Next slide. So like I said, an 8-2-12-4, which translates to 15 pounds per 1,000 square feet, or broadcasting 1.5 pounds per 100 square feet. For a homeowner, it's going to be 1.5 pounds per 100 square feet. In the summer months, when a palm is most actively growing, you can make an additional application of a 0-0-16-6 or a 0-0-22-4, or something that has no nitrogen, no phosphorus, but it has potassium and magnesium, because a palm really needs those nutrients. And you can make that application within the growing season and within our blackout periods. Okay, so if a palm is severely deficient, this is another option to give it another little boost of the potassium and magnesium if it's particularly potassium and magnesium deficient. Now, palm roots can go for 100, feet away from the palm. These palm roots can extend. I know a golf course found the palm roots definitely like 120 feet away in Arizona. So they can extend for a very long distance. But where we're most concerned about is going halfway out from the canopy and then fertilizing just around that palm. Next one, John, please. So our recommendations are 8-2-12-4 or a 0-0-22+4. And remember, in the stores, you may see 8-2-12-4 referred to as Palm Special. And sometimes they tweak the numbers a little bit, but if you see Palm Special, that's more likely going to address what UF IFAS recommends. The 0-0-22+4, that's what I see most often in the store, or 0-0-16, but sometimes it's like a 0-0-18, just depends on the store. So that's what we're typically seeing in the store. It could be out by 1 or 2 numbers, but just know that you're applying the potassium, the NPK. So your third number is going to be your potassium, and that high number is going to be great for palms during the summer months, but with no nitrogen and no phosphorus. Now, I believe I just had a question. I wanted to address that right. Could applying the palm if you have turf. So I had a homeowner who attended, was a master gardener and attended a lot of our presentations, and she was like, I know not to apply turf grass fertilizer, but my palm is right on the border of my neighbor's lawn, and he way over fertilizes with a nitrogen fertilizer. And she'd had the talk with him about, hey, we definitely don't want to be putting out too much nitrogen. There's nothing we can necessarily do about that. The palm is going to be taking up those nutrients, but you have that option of just applying the 0-0-22, hopefully to offset some of that nitrogen that the other homeowner is applying. So if you have turf grass or somebody's over applying the nitrogen fertilizer near your palm tree, again, I just make the recommendation of applying a 0-0-22+4 to offset the high nitrogen. But the 8-2-12-4 that we're recommending can also be applied on your turf grass. There's enough nitrogen in that 8-2-12-4, and the turf loves it. So the reason Dr. Broshot, who was my predecessor and who came up with this formula with Dr. Elliott, is this 8-2-12-4 can address many landscape plants in Florida and your turf grass. So that's why we make the recommendation just to go ahead and apply this one, even over your turf. So you'd be fine just applying the 8-2-12-4 as your turf fertilizer as well. Go ahead, John. So my question for you is, how do you fertilize within the 10 to 20 feet of a foot of this waterway? If you're thinking in your head, because I can't see what everybody's thinking now, but what I will tell you is I've actually had people tell me, we just go ahead and throw fertilizer here by this palm tree. You can't do that. And you can't do that. And I believe most of our counties, because you're not allowed to fertilize within 10 to 20 foot of a waterway. Okay, next slide, John. So please don't fertilize in those. And for palms like this, how do we fertilize palms like this? This is very difficult. This is in a cityscape anyway, but we see where they have the grates over the palms, and we typically see some of the fertilizer over that, or the palm. They're basically dropping the fertilizer right around the palm, the base of the palm. Next slide, John. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on some of the newer fertilizer techniques that we are evaluating. You know, we're not on board with anything that's novel like this right now, because we're still in that evaluation process. But FNGLA and ArborJet has funded a trial where we're looking at injecting a palm, or putting a hole in a palm and injecting the fertilizer into the palm for situations like I just showed you, where it was next to a waterway or it was in the cityscape. So the injection, our treatments are the injection, our standard 82124, also our standard 0022. And we're hoping to address situations where you're near a waterway, or the palm just doesn't, you don't have access to the palm's roots. Can we possibly address some of these issues by injecting? Next slide, John. Now, I know, talking to a lot of people throughout the state, they're like, well, you know, Dr. McMillan, you're a palm professor. You know that once you put a hole in that palm, it is not going to heal. That hole will be there for the rest of the palm's life. And all I can say is this: sometimes we just can't, you know, either the palm will die or we find an alternative way to fertilize it in certain situations. So this right here is a Phoenix robolini in this slide. It was previously injected, not by me, but one of my predecessors, Dr. Elliott. And so we're going on, I think, over 25 years that this palm was injected. And you can see where, to me, I think this palm looks very, very good. Again, hasn't been touched in years, but again, the palm looks great. Next slide, John. But this palm has a hole that big in it. That's my biologist sticking her hand through that hole that was created by an injection spot 25 years ago. So the palm still looks good, and it may have a big hole in it, which, you know, I'd rather have the palm survive 25 years ago by injecting it. So yes, we know not to put a hole in a palm because it will be there forever. But also, if you're looking for an alternative, we are evaluating injection as an alternative for areas where we can't fertilize certain palms. Next slide, John, please. I know we're tight on time. So again, how do we fertilize these palms? Next slide. Because our overall goal right here, folks, is to minimize or maximize nutrient uptake to minimize nutrient loss. So we're not doing this to our environment with all the algae. Next slide. And then we are not having, you know, impacting our wildlife. John, do I have a few more minutes, or do we need to start taking questions? It's 12:55.
I mean, it's up to you. We can go long. I mean, I always like to provide everybody with a link to the recording afterward. It's
Okay.
more up to your schedule.
Okay, let's just go through there's only a couple more slides. Go ahead to the next slide. And I just want to tell you, we're looking at some of the research that we're doing throughout the state of Florida, but we're looking at different things that we find that the landscapers have a lot of questions on it, the homeowners do. So when I came here 3 years ago, these were a lot of the questions that people wanted addressed. And one of them was, can we plant palms, and is it better to plant them in compost versus native soil? And we were very generously gifted basically 20 sable palmettos at the Griffin Tree Farm in Lake Placid, Florida, to conduct this trial. And we greatly appreciate Griffin Trees, and Life Soils is the one that gave us the compost. And what we're doing here is planting fresh cut sable plums that were harvested from the wild, and we're putting them here in compost versus just native soil. And we're looking at the volumetric water content, fround assessment, and the root images. Next slide, John. And you can see this is a very in-depth study to finally answer a question that I think I got like 20 questions on the first year I was here is, you know, is it better to amend our soils with compost? to help these palms in those first couple of months of establishment. So we do have on 4 spaces, if you can see the little black poles all around the palms, those are where we put the little mini rhizotrons, or they're little acrylic tubes, and we drop a camera into these acrylic tubes to look at the rooting. Next slide, John. And you can see the guy here, he's dropping in the camera, which spins around, takes a picture, and then we pull it out using the tube and just keep on moving around the palm. And we take a snapshot because we were looking at how the roots grow in either treatment. Next slide. So we did have, after 2 months, we did have roots. We could pick up roots. So they were growing definitely in the compost amendment. They seem to take off versus in the native soil. Next slide. Just a snapshot of up close of the roots for palms. And we're hoping to get some assessments, not necessarily in this study, but, you know, is this ectomycorrhizae? Are these new roots, old roots? What are we looking at here? You know, studying how palms respond to certain abiotic stresses in the soil. Next slide. And what we do is measure the palms. This is great work for our graduate students here. They love me. You can see each individual root is measured. Next slide. And then the software calculates how big those roots are. So we might have more information for you guys on what, you know, whether the roots respond better to this treatment or this treatment, and how the palm roots are responding, maybe in hopes of finding an alternative fertilizer treatment. All right, next slide, John. Keep going. Next slide. And next slide. And next slide. Okay, so the next one, again, funded by FNGLA. So grateful, very grateful for FNGLA for their support. We are trying to use drones to assess palm health here in the state of Florida. And the reason why is we would like to see if I've used drones in turf grass before I was here in Florida, and they worked beautifully. And my colleague that I'm working with at AgSpect, she's worked in all kinds of agricultural crops. So we're thinking we can definitely assess fertilizer treatments, soil treatments, water treatments, anything using drones. And hopefully we can pick up like which tree responds better to which treatment and which species responds better to which treatment. So next slide. We're determining the IO ratio, and I'll go into a little bit of what that is. So next slide, John. So we're looking at a palm from the center. And for those of you who have taken the palm physiology course, the middle of a palm is what we call the spear leaf, or the heart of the palm, or the butt of the palm. And that middle lets us know how the palm is faring. So anytime you guys see a palm and the spear leaf is up and straight and it looks beautiful, then we tend to know that the palm is doing really well. But if that spear leaf comes up and one, it's not opening up, it's yellowing, or it's riddled with black marks, or it's falling, then we know something's not right with that palm. So we think we can use this to our advantage when we do the drone imagery, because we assess the nutrients on the outside of the palm, but we also take that donut area in the middle, and it lets us know how great the palm is doing from the heart of it, or what's inside the palm. Next slide, John. So we focus on that 0.5 meter area to let us know what's going on in the palm, and then on the outer lets us know how treatments last, how long the treatments last in certain palms, and how the nutrient deficiencies ebb and flow in a palm. So we're exploring a lot of this with the drones. More to come. It will take us years. Like I said, palms don't respond as quick as turf grass does. And I come from a turf grass industry, so I've had to slow it on down and just focus on slow growth and seeing how much we can capture using these drones. Next slide. Here is us just tagging every palm tree here at the research center. So this is definitely doable. On the left, we see a high resolution drone. But we found that a lot of people don't like drones, and they certainly don't want them in their backyard. So we're trying to figure out if we could do a satellite equivalent. This is at 50 centimeters, and my colleague tells me the satellite imagery gets better and better every year. So we might be able to do that where we just take a snapshot with a satellite as it passes by and capture data, and you just pinpoint me to your yard and we take a snapshot from there. Next slide, John. And next slide. So this is it, folks. I have no more slides for you, but I am asking for your help on something. So Dr. Moore and I are conducting a survey on landscape water use, and this is basically a 3-minute survey. And you'll take your phone, just take a picture of the QR code, and then just click on the Qualtrics survey, and immediately it should pop right up. Like if I do it right now, it should pop right up, and you go immediately into the first question, which is, what is your opinion about your water bill? This is important to Dr. Moore and I because we are trying to get some feedback on landscape water use, and to, update FNGLA and some of our other colleagues, the UF Water Institute, et cetera, about how important landscape water use is. But if everyone could kindly take the survey, that would be fantastic. I would greatly appreciate it. I know Dr. Moore would appreciate it too. And so Laura just asked if there's another way to do the survey. Absolutely. If John wouldn't mind, and if I could send this survey to you, John, and you could forward it to the group that attended today, that would be great. That would help out, Kim and I, or Kim and me on this one. Now, questions. Do I have any questions, John?
Okay, let me go ahead and stop share. Let's see what we've got in the chat. Yeah, if anybody has questions, go ahead and feel free. You can just ask directly, like via audio, or you can put it into the chat. Okay, here's one I can see here. What are your thoughts on trunk injections as a last resort for palms that are severely stressed? Understanding palms do not compartmentalize.
So we are definitely evaluating it. We are using the ArborJet system in full disclosure, and they are funding some of that research. So actually, when I came on board, the extension agent Stephen Brown said, "Hey, Mica, you should really look at trunk injections because on the West Coast, there's a lot of people injecting their palms." And so I will tell you that when I've given a presentation on palm injection, I have 50% of the audience is for it, and then 50% is against it, because you do create a hole in the palm. However, I have seen enough palms to know that sometimes the palm just doesn't respond to the fertilizer. Sometimes you can't apply fertilizers like we ask you to do. So I do think that the palm tree injection, if it works, and so far I will tell you, I probably injected probably 100 palms by now, and it's an easy system. It works really well. We're learning about some of the intricacies of it, but number one, I haven't killed anything, and number two, the palms look, as it stands right now, pretty good. But for me to make a determination on it, I'm not against anything that prevents us or stops us from putting fertilizer near a waterway or improving a palm's health. If somebody gave you a palm on your 50th birthday and 20 years later it's dying and there's no other option, why not inject it? We've injected so many of them and the palms still look great, except they do have a hole in it. Now, having said that, and we need a couple more years to really understand what's going on in the palm when you inject. And I'm not against it for sure. But right now I can't make a stand on it saying, hey, it works. I'm 110% behind it because I have to check the data and then do 3 years of that and then get back to everybody saying it works and it's awesome. Or it didn't work, or you're not hurt anything, but we didn't see anything. So we don't know yet, but I'm not against it. Sorry for that long-winded.
No, I think that's good. Let's see here. In your opinion, what is the most effective application method, granular, liquid, or injection?
So good question on that. I have found that like I said, with the injection, we're still weeding through the data. Lots of trials going on right now, but the granular products I think the palms tend to respond to the granular products better. And the reason I believe is because when you pour a liquid on a palm, and all of my palms at the research center have their soils have less than 2% organic matter. So if I'm pouring liquid fertilizer around these, there's very little organic matter for that liquid or those nutrients in the liquid to attach to. And it tends to leach because if you apply a fertilizer and you know how it goes here in Florida, you think it's all clear and great. And then, 15 minutes later, we get a rainstorm. So I really do. And it is IFAS recommendations to always go with the granular fertilization. And I do believe that the palms do respond better to the granular right now.
All right, good deal. Let's see, we got some more questions. What if due to budget restrictions, we can only fertilize once per year? And does the recommendation change? I'm just also on top of that. I'm gonna go ahead for the sake of time, launch the poll too and have that going while you do Q&A. So
So the question is about if you only, and based on your you can only fertilize once a year. And based on budget restrictions, when would I do that? So number one, if you're going to only put out one application a year because of budget, you have to put out the 8-2-12-4 because that gives you everything that the palm needs. And then if I had any time to do that, when would I do that? I would absolutely do it in right around that May timeframe. And the reason is this: a palm's roots are most actively growing in the summer months. We saw that through our rooting data where the palms just took off like gangbusters in the June, July, August, and then really slowed down when it got cooler. So I would absolutely fertilize right in May, and that way the palm can capture those nutrients. And as it's actively fertilizing and it can harness all those, that's when I would do it, is right before we go into that season, the blackout period.
okay, we got some more nutrition questions. Can you trunk inject for boron deficiency?
I will say this: I have no data on any of that to back up boron trunk injection. Have I thought about it? I absolutely have. But right now, as it stands, I would not recommend it because I'm not for sure you wouldn't kill the palm. So right now, I would absolutely say don't do it because I have no data to back it up. Will you see some research probably in 3, 4, 5 years where we've taken a look at that? Probably, but don't do it now because I don't know what will happen.
Okay, another one here. Can you address the use of chelated iron?
Okay, can I address the use of chelated
Or
iron
chelated, pardon me.
for palms?
I think so. And maybe that might have something to do with the availability of it. I'm not sure. I don't know if Don, if you're there, if you want to clarify what the question was.
Don?
Yeah, I guess not.
So
Okay, here it is. As a way to get iron into the palm.
okay, so I don't have any data on that. We do see some iron deficiency in palms. It's a good question, Don, and I'm not going to say that I can actually speak on that without looking into some research on that. I won't make a call on that. I can get back to you on that one, but I don't know. I don't want to misspeak.
All right, well, I went ahead and ended the poll. Looked like folks, like we had a lot of improvement there. And and yeah, just for the sake of time, I think we should go ahead and wrap up here. We've been on a full hour at this point. So yeah, thank you, Dr. McMillan, Mica.
Yes.
Like, and I mean, it was thanks for getting through the technical difficulties. They're always updating. I mean, it could have been from our computers, it could have been from Zoom side, who knows? I'm gonna
Yeah, I
have
don't
to
know.
try and keep working on it here, but that's the first time I've had to go to this option where I've had to like
Yeah.
literally like be scrolling through for you. But I'm glad it
I
worked
think
out.
we've given 100 presentations, John, and I haven't run into an issue like that before. So I don't know, but I apologize to everybody. I really do. We'll figure
Yeah,
it out.
sorry folks. So like yeah, and I mean, and yeah, I'll keep working on Zoom too here. That's the first time that I've had that happen, and like we've gone through the COVID era where we were completely on this, but I mean they're always tweaking things, and so hopefully things will be smoother next round. But we had a huge audience for this webinar series, and so yeah, I look forward to having Dr. McMillan come back here someday because
Absolutely love to. Thank you. Thank you very much, John. I appreciate that. And you can always reach me, John, at Mica McMillan, mica.mcmillan@ufl.edu. But and I'll bring this up to everybody. If you email us, your best bet is to go through your extension agents first, because I know that John knows everybody and Henry knows everybody, but also it's better to reach out to them first in regards to us getting so many more emails. But I will always, if you email me, we'll get back to you and I'll CC John so we can let everybody know, what are some of the questions that are going on in this area.
awesome. Yeah, use us. We're here. We're the first line, and we like going out and looking at palms, and there's plenty of that to try and diagnose. So
Absolutely.
all right, folks. Well, have a good rest of your week here.
Bye, everybody.
We'll
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.